Welcome back to our series on Lesson 4. This particular project is called Simple List Box Reader. That's what the LB is. And you'll see that this project, if you open it up in Solution Explorer, has actually 3 forms. I call them Part 1, 2, and 3. This is the first one. Very simple. Then we're going to do more complex things. We're working our way up to using loops. And I wanted to use the list boxes to do that because it just is a nice little way to introduce this topic to you. But before we do that, I got to teach you a couple things. With your list box, I want you to make a note that every item has what's called an index property or an index number, and they always start with 0. So the first item in my list box is 0, the second one is 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. Now you'll notice down here in these 2 labels, I'm saying you selected index number 4 and you chose hand cleaner. I just want to show you real quickly how I did that. I'm using 2 properties from the list box to do that. And also notice that I only can pick one item from this list box. In our other projects, I'll show you how you can add the capability to pick more than one thing. But right now, this was just a very simple one, and it's just picking one thing. All right, so see what it does? Let's take a look at this and see what's happening in code. It's a very simple project. In the form load event, I'm just loading my list box with a bunch of items as usual. And down here, I've got a couple options for you. In the selected index change event, which means when they click on one of the items in the list box, this event handler gets triggered. And what I wanted to do was to put the index number for that item inside this label. I just called it label 1. And what I put is I said you selected item with index number, and then I'm just appending this, and I'm taking whichever index it is, converting it to a string, and putting it into that label. Now here's what I want you to notice. The selected index property is the thing that keeps track of the number of that item. Not the number of items, but the number of each individual item. So if I picked on the very first item, then it would be an index number of 0. Now the list box keeps track of this for us. We don't have to figure it out. But I just wanted to show you how you can use it. Now look down here for a minute. Let's skip this line. Let's go down here. Down here it says, let's take the item that they selected and put it into the label or into the text box. We've done this before. Notice this time I'm using selected item. Okay, so selected item is like what it says. Selected index is the internal number that's used by the operating system to keep track of our items. Now I wanted to show you one new way, because you may like this better, I don't know. Instead of using the convert to string function that's built into VB, you can now use it in this kind of a style. And you notice you take the selected item, selected index from the items, and then you can do dot to string. And I think I've told you, but the dot to string method has been added to a whole bunch of things in Visual Basic.net for 2005. And so you may find that this is a little more intuitive, or you like it better. I don't know. I've asked students both ways, and I kind of get a 50-50 response. So this line up here, this whole line, does exactly the same thing as this line. So you've got 2 ways of doing exactly the same thing. Okay, just remember the index numbers all start from 0. Now let's go look at part 2 of this thing and see what's happening with it. I'm going to change this and tell it to run step 2. And in step 2, I've created a little form with 2 list boxes. And on this one, what you can do is you can pick an item. Let's say I pick coolant or wiper blades, and I push on this little button, and it takes whatever I selected here, places it in the next list box. So this gives you a chance to build a little wizard, perhaps, or show you how you could put together a little tutorial, or just let people buy multiple things at your store. When I clear this, it clears this list box, not the other one. And again, I've set it up so it can only select one item at a time. Okay? So let's see how I did that. If we look at the code for step 2 now, you're going to have to look through your packet and find the code for step 2, I called it. That's the name of the form. This I just copied and pasted, so this is no big deal. The clear button is going to clear all the items out of that list box. So you just take the name of your list box, and mine on this one happened to be LST purchased. Here, let me put it right here. So this one over here is LST purchased, and we're just going to go in here and use the clear method and clear all the items. That's all you do with that one. Down here, we're just closing it when they click that button. And then here, finally, I'm going to take the selected item right here and add it to that second list box. So I'm taking whatever they picked out of LST items, which was my original one, this one over here with all the stuff in it, and I'm calling this one LST purchased. So they're picking items out of my store and they're purchasing them. Think of it that way. So I'm taking the things from the items, or the list of items, taking the selected item and adding it to the list of items in the LST purchased items collection. Okay? So under when they add an item, just comes in here, runs this code. Very simple application, but it's kind of handy, and it's leading up to some other things that I want to show you. Okay? Now let's go to step 3 for a minute, because that is a little more involved. In step 3, what I have here is the same kind of situation, only now if I hold down the control key, I can pick multiple items from my list box. Okay, I'll show you how to do that. If I don't want that, I can hit like battery, and I can hold down the shift key and I can select everything from battery to alternator belt. Now you're used to doing this in Windows list boxes, but I'm going to show you how to add that capability so you know how to do it. And then it does exactly the same thing, except it can take multiple items at the same time. Now here's something I want to teach you. I put a multi-line text box. That's what this is. I changed the font to 11 point, and I made it really, really skinny, so I only got one line. I'm sorry, one number per line. That's how I made that. That's not a special control or something, just a regular old list box. And I did it to show you something. You'll notice that the index numbers for the items all start at 0, and that the last item is index number 6. It's really important that you understand this concept. The last item's index number is 6, but you'll notice that we actually have 7 items. Alright? So the last item's index number, 6 in this case, is always one less than the total number of items. And that's because we're starting to count from 0 on the index up here and not 1. Alright? I'm going to say that one more time because this is really critical, or you're not going to understand my loop in this next thing. Every item in the list box has an index property that's set for it, and the very first item in our list box is number 0, the next one's 1, 2, and so forth. The total number of items in a list box are contained in a property called count. If you said x equals listbox1.count, x would be 7 in this case. Okay? And the list box does that for us, and we can use it whenever we want. We will in a minute. But here's what I want you to understand, the relationship between the number of items, or the count, and these index numbers. The total number of items is always one more, 7, one more than 6, than the last item's index number. Okay? Now here's the reason I'm telling you that. What I want to do is, when they pick, let's say I pick 3 items. When they pick these 3 items, and they bring them over here, when they click on this little button, what I want to do is I want to set up a little loop, and I want to cycle through the list of all the items that were selected, battery, hand cleaner, radiator hose, and the list box does it for us. It's very cool, you'll see. I just want to make a loop and go through every item that was selected, everything that's blue. It doesn't read the whole mess, it just reads the ones that were selected, and I want to put them over here. Well, in order to do that in a loop, I have to start from the first item, and I have to cycle through all the total number of items. Okay, so let's take a look and see how we do that. If we look at the code for this little puppy, you'll see that the first section is all the same. I have heavily commented this for you. Okay, I'm not going to read it to you, but I've commented it so you can have that. And then I want to show you what I'm doing. Right here is my code. When they click the button Add, I want to cycle through all of the selected items, see that, in the list box. I'm going to just go through here with our for next loop, and I'm going to add those selected items to my LST purchased items. It's just like the one we did a few minutes ago, but now I've got multiple items. So I've got to cycle through and get all of them. I'm just going to read them in order. Now, in order to do that, I'm using a for next loop. The reason I'm using a for next loop is because in this case, I know how many times I'm going to run through it. If you have a loop where you're not sure how many things you're going to run, like in a database or a list of pictures or something, then you're going to use something else. But when you really know how many times you want to do something, a for next loop really works well. And here's how I set it up. Now, don't be overwhelmed by this. I'm just going to show it to you in little pieces. So if I create a loop control variable called x, and that's just what I use, I'm going to come in here with my for next loop, okay, and I'm going to say x equals 0. We're going to start with 0. Now, why am I starting with 0? Because the first index number of the selected items is item 0. Okay? Remember, selected items is just a group or a list that the list box creates for us of all the selected items. In the old days, you would have had to do it like this. You would have had to come in and let me run it. You would have had to come in here. Let's say I picked 3 things, and you would have had to start looping here at the first one and say, if this one is selected, then put it over here. If this one's selected, put it over here. If this one's selected, you had to go through every miserable item in the list box. And if you had hundreds or even thousands of things, that can take a tremendous amount of time, particularly if they only picked 1 or 2 items. So in the later versions of Visual Basic, they changed the way these list boxes work, and as you select items, it actually takes these index numbers and puts them over into memory someplace. So it knows that items 0, 2, and 4 got selected. All right? Now, since these 3 are selected and it's going to put them in a brand new list, guess what? Spark plugs will be 0, coolant will be 1, and hand cleaner will be 2. Because they're taking these 3 that are highlighted and putting them over in a brand new list starting from 0. All right, so we got 3 items, but they start from 0. So they'll be index number 0, 1, and 2. All right, let's go back to my loop for a minute. Let me see if I can explain this to you. Now, my loop needs to run from the very first item, which is going to be 0, all the way up to the number of items, which is a count, minus 1. Now, if you don't put the minus 1, the whole thing blows up. Now remember, count is a property that keeps track of how many items they selected. All right? So in Mr. Listbox, LST items I called it, the selected items, make sure you pick items, you guys. There's one for selected item, but you want selected items because we're doing multi-select. The selected items, and then how many they selected, the dot count of that. All right? And remember, since it's numbering from 0, the count, in this case 3 items, is always 1 less than the biggest index property of the last item. If I have 3 items and they start numbering from 0, the first one's 0, the second one's 1, and the third item is 2. So I can't say for x equals 0 to 2. I'm sorry, I can't make it say for x equals 0 to 3 because I'm using x as a counter down here. Now watch what happens. I'm going to say start in the list of selected items. When x goes through the first time, when this for next loop runs the very first time, x is 0. All right? So it comes in here and says take selected item number 0. So it's going to take the first one from the list, add it to the other list box. So I'm using x to do double duty. X is controlling my loop, but x is also being used to identify the items inside my list, just like a little subscript. Now it adds it in there, and then it says next. Comes back up here, and it says now x is 1. Remember, every time a for next loop runs, unless you tell it differently, it updates your it updates your loop control variable by 1. It just increments it by 1. So now x is 1. Comes in here. It says find selected item number 1. Well, that's the second one that they chose. Put it in here. Throw it over into this list box. Do it again. Now x is 2. Come up here. X comes in here. They say take the next item, index number 2. Now that's the third item, remember, because they're starting numbering from 0. and it puts it in the list box, and away it goes. Then it comes up here and says x is going to be equal to 3. Well, if that's a legal statement, then it'll keep running. If it's not, it won't run. Turns out that this is going to run until x equals 2. Remember, the count is 3. I've got 3 items that have been selected, and I'm telling it to run until x is equal to the count 3 minus 1, so that's 2. So if I would have put right here, I could have put for x equals 0 to 2, just like that, and if I only select 3 items, this will work fine. If I select 1 item, it'll blow up. If I select 4 items, it'll blow up. Right? So the reason I did it like this is to make it really versatile. So whether I have 5 items, 5,000 items, or whatever, this code will run, because it's just going to run all the way up until we see how many of the items they did select that are held in the count property. And we're just going to subtract 1 because you've got the darn 0 business. In the old days of VB, you could change your program so you didn't have to do this, because you could make everything start counting from 1. It made it so much simpler. But they eliminated that. You can't do that anymore. So what you have to remember is everything starts counting from 0, with the exception of just a few little things. Okay? Now, this down here is just a regular clear. I'm just clearing all the items. And this one, of course, just closes our program. All right? Now, it's going to take a little practice for you to understand this, and we're going to build one together in class so that you get a feel for this. But make sure you have this code available to you. Make sure you read this, and I would encourage you to build one of these projects on your own so you get a feel for this. Okay? Now, just to review, the selected items is a list of the selected items that they chose from the list box, and Mr. Listbox creates that for you in memory, and all we have to do is go grab them. They're identified by index numbers starting with 0. So selected item number 0 would be the first one they chose. Selected item number 1 is the second one they chose, and selected item number 2 is the third item they chose. Okay? Those numbers have nothing to do necessarily with these. Okay? Because if I pick number 2, number 4, number 5, you're not using these index numbers, you're using ones from that other list. Now, one last thing to show you. On this list box, I told you they could make multiple selections, so let me show you how to do that. If you click on that list box and go down here to where it says selection mode, they call it. See this? They have all these things. If you don't want them to select anything, you can put none. That's sort of useless. 1 is the default. Multi-simple allows them to pick multiple things, but it doesn't let them use the shift key and all that. So I just use what's called multi-extended. Just pick this one. And then when it runs, you can just pick one or whatever you want if you're just clicking. But if you hold down the control key, you can make multiple ones. And then, like I showed you, if you hold down the shift key, you can pick an entire group and put those over there. Okay? Now, these right here would be like the selected items that are in memory. Okay? So you can think of it that way. These are the selected items, and it looks like this. Now you notice that this is 0, 1, 2, and 3. So if I was going to make a loop to go through this, I would say for x equals 0, first one, all the way up to count, which is 4, minus 1. Okay? There's 4 items in there. And the list box knows there's 4, but this is item 0, 1, 2, and 3. So in my loop, I would have to say for x equals 0 to 3, if I knew they were only going to pick these 4. But that would be kind of kind of silly and not very helpful and useless to us. Something more versatile would be for x equals 0, first item, to the total number of items, 4 in this case, minus 1. And then you can use x like I did, not only as a loop control variable, but you can also use x to manage your index property of the little item in the list. It's just a subscript. Okay? Just like apartments, you got 10 apartments. Each one could be 2950 Chapman, but each one of them is apartment 1, apartment 2, apartment 3, apartment 4. That's what this is. This is the address. This is 2925 Chapman, and this is apartment 1, when X is 2, it's apartment 2, and so forth. That's all they are. They're just little subscripts to identify different pieces of data that are all coming from the same place or subsumed under the same name. All right? Good deal.